The lore behind Lord of Mysteries is both fascinating and overwhelming. Whether it be Beyonders, the paths, the secret organizations, or the world it all takes place in, all of it is so meticulously crafted and richly layered that it pulls you deeper with every revelation. None of it is spoon-fed to you either, so you're kind of piecing it all together just like how Klein is. It's episode 2 that plunges us into that world of mystery, and we don't really get a chance to absorb all the information they're giving. Combine this with the fact a lot of that information is condensed for brevity's sake, and I can see why so many people come out confused. I'm sure over time, repetition will make lots of these concepts more clear, but the parts of the web novel this episode should have covered has so much more to it. So, if you're curious to see what you missed and learn more about the world Lord of Mysteries has to offer, stick around since this will cover all of that. Let's get started. Last episode, we ended things right after Klein finished his first attempt in the Grey Fog, so let's pick things up immediately after. Setting aside the whole chapter dedicated to Alger and Audrey, there was a blink and you miss it moment giving context to what just happened with Klein. You see, these 4 dots were clearly a result of the ritual. They seemed to correspond with the 4-corner setup allowing it to happen, so Klein figured it meant he no longer needed to gather food in order to do the ritual. As amazing as that was if true, what was terrifying was the idea that Chinese divinations from Earth could produce real and lasting effects here. It was yet another of the strange and unnatural things Klein would be exposed to. Enough that he was starting to see why the fear of the unknown was even a thing to begin with. Now, 3 hours had passed since he first entered the fog, so before he would contemplate what exactly just happened, Klein decided it was best to eat first. He would prepare a meal out of some bread and potatoes, knowing full well he can't just eat meat whenever he wants anymore. It was a clear downside to being in this new world of his. A full stomach would allow him to think things over clearly though, so it was after eating that he would come to the conclusion becoming a Beyonder was a priority. After Alger and Audrey had expressed such interest in it, to Klein this seemed like the best way to overcome the unknown at the moment. Of course, he had no idea how exactly to become a Beyonder, but if he waited long enough, eventually the formula for the Spectator Potion would become known to him. Alger was eventually gonna tell Audrey it, so it was after that that he could just create it himself. Klein's next priority was to figure out what happened to the original Klein, so that included why he killed himself and what happened in the events leading up to it. This also included trying to recover as many memory fragments as possible, so any clues helping in that were important too. Luckily for Klein, his original self liked to take notes. He had stacks of diaries detailing specific days and what he had learned during them. There were topics of history like the primordial times and the inevitability of the Age of Steam, then the more recent entries regarding the discovery of a notebook from the 4th Epoch, a period of time from over 1,000 years ago. So, this was a very old notebook, and the research within was a goldmine for any history student. Reason being that the history of the 4th Epoch was incredibly mysterious and inherently incomplete. Any tombs, cities, and records were always far and few between, and for any of the records that did exist, they were typically provided by one of the 7 major churches. So, who knows how accurate any of that is, but what's seemingly common knowledge are 3 nations that supposedly existed in the 4th Epoch. There was the Solomon Empire, the Tudor Dynasty, and the Trunsuist Empire, all of which were powers from a time also referred to as the Age of the Gods. The epochs before were much more like legends, so for a history major like Klein, the 4th was definitely the most interesting. Klein's diaries then proceed to detail his progress through the notebook, a lot of which gives context to everything Klein read when he first awoke. There was the discovery of the text being a modified version of ancient Fasak, the author being a member of the Antigonus family, the family's high standing within the Solomon Empire, a secret transaction with a person named Tudor, then the author's mission to visit the nation of the Evernight. It was a domain supposedly located on the highest peak of the Hornasis mountain range. The next entry was, "Are these strange things real?" Then finally the iconic line of, "Everyone will die, including me." So there was quite a bit of information Klein had sifted through already. It was before he could piece any of it together, though, that the inspectors would interrupt, seeking answers to the mysterious suicide of his colleagues Naya and Welch. They were the 2 interpreting the Antigonus notebook alongside Klein. When Leonard asked him about that final line in his latest diary, Klein decided the best thing was to just be frank. Naturally, there were certain things that could be said and those that couldn't, but as a veteran keyboard warrior, Klein was skilled at navigating situations like this. So, the whole interrogation would end without Klein being taken in, a different outcome from what we saw in the anime. He did suspect he was being watched though, so in an attempt to make it seem like he was truly in danger, Klein decided to act panicked. The inspectors had showed little interest in his spectacle, allowing Klein to calm down a bit. He would rest easy knowing he wasn't in that much trouble yet. This would then lead to a whole chapter dedicated to his cooking, time he would use to reflect on the past as well as the new simple life he was thrust into. Melissa would then come home and be shocked by the meal he cooked, then the two would share a heartwarming moment as brother and sister. The night would then end mostly peaceful and uneventful, but it was once morning came that Inspector Dunn would come knocking again. He had found proof confirming Klein went to Welch's place on the night he died, so now he was back to take Klein in for more questioning. Klein had already revealed everything he knew, but still that wasn't enough to prove his innocence. This put his transmigration secret at risk, and since the only other person he knew was a transmigrator was assassinated, Klein wasn't too keen on them finding out about it. This led to his attempt at escape, which in the novel was pretty much like how we saw in the anime. The only difference is that there wasn't this whole Inception-like sequence suggesting the encounter was a dream to begin with. It was once Klein had awoken from it that he was surprised to see it was only 2 AM still. Dunn was still there waiting for him in the hallway, except now he was introducing himself as a Nighthawk. It was a name Klein recognized as one of the codenames for the Church of the Evernight Goddess's Beyonder teams. A revelation that made Klein think Dunn had manipulated his dreams in a way that seemed like complete control over it. What it really was, though, was simply Dunn entering his dream then providing the guidance he thought was necessary. It was all part of figuring out whether Klein was telling the truth or not. By getting him to recall his memories and his dreams, his suppressed emotions and dark thoughts should have become a lot more amplified. That being the case, whatever stories Klein tells there would be much more believable. Now, that may be how it worked for most others, but for Klein, he found it wasn't like a dream at all. You see, he clearly remembered having rational thoughts, so anything Dunn saw was only what Klein wanted him to see. It was in the anime that the spirit medium would analyze Klein's thoughts immediately after this, but in the novel, Dunn would instead have to take Klein to where she is first. This would have them share a carriage ride to Welch's apartment, during which the two would discuss the possible outcomes here. Obviously, escape was impossible, but Dunn didn't fault him for trying. Reason being that if it was him being taken in, then he would have done the same. This is because regardless of whether he remembers committing the crime or not, if proven guilty, Klein's life would be over regardless. That being the case, it was a safer gamble to just try and escape than start a new life in the southern continent. If the medium proves Klein truly doesn't remember anything though, then next Dunn would have to make sure Klein isn't cursed, possessed by cacodemons, or carrying any psychological problems. It was the ideal outcome should everything go properly. In practice, supernatural events like this rarely ever did though, since for Dunn, his experiences proved otherwise. Like, there was this one case where he had to deal with an evil cult, and it was here live sacrifices were made via suicide to please an evil god they worshipped. One of the followers defected and reported it, resulting in an investigation that would reveal the god they worshipped was nothing but a randomly thought-up entity meant to make the leader rich. All members minus the whistleblower were then arrested, then after intense evaluations clearing him of the same things that Klein would be tested for, he would be released into the public to start over. He would get a job, happily marry, then have 2 children, but despite living a life as pleasant as could be, this whistleblower still ended up strangling himself to death sometime later. So, the moral of the story is that despite escape from the supernatural seeming likely, there's always the possibility it might just be temporary, kinda like the way death is in Final Destination. What then was the best way to resolve this? Well, Klein believed it might be to become a Beyonder. Now, it was once they arrived at Welch's apartment that immediately Klein would feel like he was surrounded by something. It was only him and Dunn around, yet for some reason Klein felt like the area was crowded. As it turns out, this feeling of being watched stemmed from the numerous spirits that were apparently spying on him. spirits which the medium Daly was just in contact with. Normally, Daly wouldn't take any measures to make her psychoanalysis comfortable, but because Klein wasn't an enemy and more so just a witness, fragrances were given to him to mitigate pain and make him more susceptible to the process as a whole. In the anime, the whole thing had happened really quick, but here this entrance into his mind happened slowly. Eventually, Klein would be plunged into a dreamlike state similar to the fog, except this time there wasn't a lingering sense of madness present. No. Instead, there was only a calm voice bewitching Klein into a state that would hopefully reveal what really hid underneath. When nothing was unearthed, Daly simply let Klein go and done was finished. We didn't get that same level of hide-and-seek as what the anime showed, but I'm glad they added it since the whole sequence was a lot more tense and eventful. It was once Klein had awakened that, despite Dunn saying he was free to go, Klein was still worried whatever evil spurred him into suicide was still after him. Dunn assured him that 80% of survivors in incidents like these typically didn't experience any horrifying after effects, but for Klein, 4/5 still wasn't safe enough. That's when Dunn would suggest joining the church as a Beyonder, since should something happen, the Nighthawks or the power they provide would certainly be able to help him. The only thing it would cost would be his freedom. That and the risk of losing control as a Beyonder. This is because out of all the cases the judiciary teams like the Nighthawks take care of, 1/4 of them are usually Beyonder related. Most of those are Beyonders who lose control, and a large number of that are usually their very own teammates. Such was the danger that came when trying to become a Beyonder. Why is that the case? Well, that was something Klein would understand only if he joined them. Whether as a civilian staff member or a full-fledged Beyonder himself, joining the Nighthawks would reveal all their secrets and the dangers plaguing their Beyonders. That being the case, the safest thing to do would be to join as a civilian, then decide whether to become a Beyonder after. The main problem with that, though, is that one doesn't simply become a Beyonder just because they choose to do so. With the Nighthawks being a division under the Church of the Evernight Goddess, the church needed to first accept him. Luckily for Klein, not only was he a history graduate, which the church urgently needed, his recent incident indicated he was lucky. It was a quality that often got people accepted into the church. Why, might you ask, does the church need people well-versed in history? Well, as an organization that often encountered documents and objects from the 4th epoch or earlier, having a history specialist to decipher them was essential. There was, however, a strict confidentiality clause preventing just anyone from becoming a member, mainly due to their lack of trust regarding outsiders. You see, Dunn believed humanity's stupidity was beyond imagination, and Klein could only agree with an iconic quote from Roselle. In the end, Klein still wasn't sure whether he would join the church, but the idea of becoming a civilian staff member was very much enticing. The pay was similar to that of the lecturer position he was applying for, and it would only go up in accordance with his experience and contributions. The only downsides were a minimum 5-year commitment, a lifetime confidentiality agreement, and the inability to leave the city without express permission to do so. There were also no weekends since shift work could be given at any time. Now, it was before Klein had come to the decision to become a Beyonder that he would first go back home to contemplate his options. He would spend a great deal of time comparing all the advantages and disadvantages. It was a thorough and comprehensive thought process that covered pretty much everything. What eventually went to sway his decision, though, was an interesting quote that went like this: "The inferior recluse hides away in the wild, the superior the crowd." It's a quote that essentially means it's better for him to hide his identity as a Nighthawk rather than anything else. Doing so would also teach him concepts that would certainly help in the Grey Fog, so if he was to truly take advantage of those he brought into it, upping his general knowledge was definitely the best way to do so. Fast forward past a bit of lore regarding the world's transit system, and Klein would find himself on his way to become a Nighthawk. At the pub, he would witness the grotesque sight of 2 dogs rabidly hunting hundreds of rats, a spectacle built upon a betting sport to see which dog could catch the most. The bartender would then direct him to a different location known as Blackthorn Security Company, the place where we see him meet Roseanne. She's been part of the Nighthawks for about 5 years now, and her father was a member who'd sacrificed himself around that same time as well. She would lead him to a room known as the Chaunis Gate, as that was the area Dunn was currently on watch in. His contract would then be signed as quickly as we saw in the anime. Then the Blackthorn Security Company was revealed to actually be the 7th unit of the Awa County Police's Special Operations Department. Units 1 to 4 did basic security and police stuff, while Units 5 and up handled supernatural incidents in whatever city they were stationed in. For the Nighthawks specifically, they handled incidents related to followers of the Evernight Goddess, specifically those in their own city of Tingen. Unit 6 were the mandated punishers of the Lord of Storms, and they handled the area around the Pier region. Unit 5 was a group known as the Machinery Hive Mind, and they were responsible for the university area and suburbs. Now, the Nighthawks weren't that big at all, since the total number of them was only 12. There were 6 formal members who acted as Beyonders, then another 6 who worked as civilian staff, Klein included. This brings us now to quite a bit of lore, since Dunn's conversation here talked about everything from the myth of creation to the Beyonder potion system. If we focus on the myth of creation first, the story shared is surprisingly consistent across all major churches. None devalued the tales of the other gods, so either the creation myth was real or the churches had a long history of interreligious conflict, ultimately resulting in a strategic shared myth that they could all agree upon. Either way, in every scenario, it all began with the Creator. They had awoken from chaos, shattered the darkness that enveloped everything, then fused into the universe to make all that exists. Every part of their body had become something. The most important, however, was his spirit, since that became the other deities like the eternal blazing sun, the Lord of Storms, and the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. His wisdom had also given birth to humanity, and all that would be part of an era known as the First Epoch. It was a period of time otherwise known historically as the Chaos Epoch. The Second Epoch was a bit unclear, but it's written that this was the era when the Evernight Goddess awoke. Together, her and the other gods would work together to help humanity survive the Cataclysm. It was a new era of strife defining the Third Epoch. This would be the same time that Mother Earth and the God of Combat would appear as well. Then finally the God of Craftsmanship would be born in the Fourth Epoch. So it's from this that the more ancient gods were the more traditional, making the Evernight Goddess not as orthodox as the original 3. She, however, was well known by many titles, most of which Klein's mother would recite every evening before dinner. Lady of Crimson symbolized the red moon, tying the Evernight Goddess to the eye of the Creator from which it came. So if the first 3 gods came from the Creator's spirit, it's just as impressive that the Evernight Goddess came from its eye. All the other gods had similar explanations too, but for the most recent upstart of the God of Craftsmanship, their church was relatively weak until the creation of the steam engine. Now, with humanity being born from the Creator's wisdom too, that meant everything stemmed from the same origin. They may not be blessed with magical powers right from the get-go, but over time, humanity figured out how to obtain that power via other means. This would be the power of the Beyonders. They found that by using the correct parts of evil spirits, dragons, monsters, magical trees, flowers, or crystals, combining them together would create a potion. Consuming this potion would then provide some sort of special ability, the power of which depended on how high grade the potion was. Consuming them didn't always mean success though, as there were 3 possible outcomes of failure. First was mental death and the complete breakdown of the body, a terrible fate in which the person would become a monster. Second was a change in personality that made the person cold, cruel, and indifferent, then the third was a mental disorder turning the person crazy instantly. That was what Dunn meant by losing control. Apparently, people in this category became more devilish than the devil. It was the Beyonders before who figured this out through rigorous experimentation, eventually perfecting the potion system with the help of the Blasphemy Slate. What is the Blasphemy Slate? Well, that was the most critical factor in determining a potion's system formation and completion. So it was with that they were able to form a tiered system of chains into stable progression paths, a concept you might be more familiar with as sequences. Each sequence is numbered from 1 to 9, and the lower the number, the higher the grade of potion. Currently, each of the 7 major churches held control of at least one complete sequence, while others have remained incomplete for centuries to millennia. For a bit more context on the blasphemy slate, all that's known about it is that it was created by some evil gods. No one knows how it was made, what it contains, or what's so special about it, but should anyone discover any information pertaining to it, it was of the utmost importance to report it immediately. Dunn's next point highlights the further dangers of losing control, something that's often attributed to a human's innate spiritual perception. You see, it's not uncommon for someone to be born with the partial characteristics of a Beyonder. This means they can hear things others can't hear or see things others can't see, placing them onto a sequence they might not even know about. Should they then consume a potion that differs from the sequence they're already on, the effects of doing so could range from mental disorder to loss of control to even death. A Beyonder can't stray from one path if they've already chosen another. To do so would result in warped powers and most certainly lead to a semi-deranged state of cruelty and insanity. Now, this much is pretty easy to avoid, but when it comes to losing control, the most common trigger is speed. What I mean is that should one consume a higher grade potion without first absorbing and digesting the full effects of the previous, madness would accumulate and that person would lose control eventually. There's no telling how long it takes for a potion to be fully digested, but as is standard with the Nighthawks, one potion can only be taken every 3 years. It was a strict waiting period that even then still resulted in numerous losses every year. Finally, the deeper one progresses, the more enhanced their perception becomes, and this in turn exposes the Beyonder to illusions, spiritual enticements, and all sorts of hidden dangers. Unless that Beyonder has incredible willpower, they'll always be at risk of getting overwhelmed by madness. One small spark of desire or greediness will ultimately lead to their demise. So, as the founder of the Nighthawks once said, Beyonders are guardians, but also a bunch of miserable wretches constantly fighting against dangers and madness. It's an amazing quote that sums up their existence nicely. And with that, I think that's a pretty good place to stop, so if you liked what you saw and want to see more, then be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'm planning to do multiple videos a week to catch up now, so as long as enough people remain interested, expect more Lord of Mysteries. You can even help the video do better yourself by leaving a like. But anyway, until next time, ciao.